Welcome to the 1000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 641st night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Ajib sent orders to assemble the troops who march forthright to Cufa. Meanwhile, Gharib, being troubled with Ajib's escape, dispatched in quest of him 1,000 braves, who dispersed on all sides and sought him a day and a night, but found no trace of him. So they returned and told Gharib, who called for his brother Sahim, but found him not. Whereat he was sore concerned, fearing for him from the shifts of fortune. And lo, Sahim entered and kissed the ground before Gharib, who rose when he saw him and asked, Where hast thou been, O Sahim? He answered, O king, I have been to Cufa, and there I find that the dog Ajib hath made his way to his capital, and is healed of his hurts. Eke, he hath written letters to his vassals, and sent them to his nabobs, who have brought him troops. When Gharib heard this, he gave the command to march. So they struck tents and fared for Cufa. When they came in sight of the city, they found it compassed about with a host like the surging main, having neither beginning nor end. So Gharib with his troops encamped in face of Kafirs, and set up his standards, and darkness fell down upon the two hosts, whereupon they lighted campfires, and kept watch till daybreak. Then King Gharib rose and made the wazoo ablution, prayed a two-bow prayer, according to the rite of our father Abraham the friend, on whom be the peace. After which he commanded the battle drums to sound the point of war. Accordingly, the kettle drums beat to command, and the standards fluttered, while the fighting men, armor donned and their horses mounted, and themselves displayed, to plain fared. Now, the first to open the gate of the war was King Al-Damaj, who urged his charger between the two opposing armies, and displayed himself, and played with the swords and the spears, till both hosts were confounded, and marveled, after which he cried out, saying, Who is for jousting? Let no sluggard come out to me, or weakling, for I am Al-Damaj, the king, brother of Kundamir the king. Then they rushed forth a horseman of the Kafirs, as he were a flame of fire, and drave at Al-Damaj, without word said. But the king received him with a lance thrust in the breast, so dure that the point issued from between his shoulders. And Allah hurried his soul to the fire, the abiding place dire. Then came forth a second he slew, and a third he slew likewise, and they ceased not to come out to him, and he to slay them, till had made an end of 60 and 70 fighting men. Hereupon miscreants and men of might hung back and would not encounter him. But Ajib cried out to his men and said, Fie on you, O folk! If ye are all going forth to him one by one, he will not leave any of you sitting or standing. Charge on him all at once, and cleanse of them our earthly wound, and strew their heads for your horses' hoofs like a plain of stone. So they waved the awe-striking flag, and host was leaped upon host, and blood rained in streams upon the earth, and railed, and the judge of battle ruled, in whose ordinance is no unright. The fearless stood firm on feet in the stead of fight, whilst the faint-hearted gave back, and took to flight, thinking the day would never come to an end, nor the certainties of gloom would be drawn by the hand of night. And they ceased not to battle with swords, and to smite till light darkened, and murk starkened. Then the kettle drums of the infidels beat at the retreat, but Gharib, refusing to stay his arms, drave with the Paynimri and the believers in unity. The Moslems followed him. How many heads and hands they sore, how many necks and sinews they tore, how many knees and spines they mashed, and how many grown men and youth they put to death bashed. In the first gleam of morning gray, the infidels broke and fled away, in disorder and disarray, and the Moslems followed them till midday, and took over 20,000 of them, whom they brought to their tent in bonds to stay. Then Gharib sat down before the gate of Cufa, and commanded a herald to proclaim pardon and protection for every wight who would leave the worship to idol dites, and profess the unity of his All-Might, the Creator of mankind, and of light and night. So was made proclamation, as he bade in the streets of Cufa, and all that were therein embraced the true faith, great and small, And they issued forth in a body, and renewed their Islam before King Gharib, who rejoiced in them with exceeding joy, and his breast broadened, and he threw off all annoy. Presently he inquired of Mardas and his daughter Madia, and being told that he had taken up his abode between the Red Mountain, he called Sahim and said to him, "Find out for me whether it is become of thy father." Sahim mounted steed without stay or delay, and set his berry-brown spear in rest, and fared on in quest till he reached the Red Mountain, where he found for his father, yet found no trace of him, nor of his tribe. However, he saw in their stead an elder of the Arabs, a very old man, broken with excess of years, and asked him of the folk and whither they were gone. Replied he, "O my son, when Mardas heard of Gharib's descent from Cufa, he feared with great fear, and taking his daughter and folk, set out with his handmaids and negroes into the wild in the world, and I wot not whither he went." So Sahim, hearing the Sheikh's words, returned to Gharib and told him thereof, whereat he was greatly concerned. Then he sat down on his father's throne, and opening his treasuries, distributed largesse to each and every one of his braves. And he took up his abode in Cufa, and sent out spies to get news of Ajib. He also summoned the grandees of the realm, who came and did him homage, and as also did the citizens, and he bestowed on them sumptuous robes of honor, and commended to the riots to their care. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 642nd night, she pursued, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Gharib, after giving robes of honor to the citizens of Cufa, and commending the riots to their care, went out on a day of the days to hunt, with 100 horse, and fared on till he came to the wadi, abounding in trees and fruits, and rich in rills and birds. It was a pasturing place for roes and gazelles, to the spirit of delight, whose sense reposed from the languor of fight. They encamped in the valley, for the days were clear and bright, and there passed the night. On the morrow, Gharib made the wazoo ablution, and prayed the 2 bow dawn prayer, offering up praise and thanks to Almighty Allah, when lo and behold, there arose a clamor and confusion in the meadows, and he bade Sahim go see what was going on. So Sahim mounted forthright, and rode till he espied goods being plundered, and horses haltered, and women carried off, and children crying. Whereupon he questioned one of the shepherds, saying, "What be all of this?" And they replied, "This is the harem of Mardas, chief of the Banu Qatan, and his good, and that of his clan. For yesterday Jarmkhan slew Mardas, and made prize of his women and children, and household stuff, and all the belonging of his tribe. It is his wont to go a-riding, and to cut off highways, and waylay wayfarers, and he is a furious tyrant. Neither Arabs nor kings nor can prevail against him, and he is the scourge and curse of the country." Now, when Sahim heard these news of his sire's slaughter, and the looting of his harem and property, he returned to Gharib, and told him the case. Wherefore fire was added to his fire, and his spirit chafed to wipe out his shame, and his blood wit to claim. So he rode with his men after the robbers till he overtook them, and fell upon them, crying out, saying, "Almighty Allah upon the rebel, the traitor, the infidel!" And he slew in a single charge 21 fighting men. Then he halted in midfield with no coward's heart, and cried out, "Where is Jarmkhan? Let him come out to me, that I may make him quaff the cup of disgrace, and rid of him earth's face." Hardly had he made an end of speaking, when forth rushed Jarmkhan, as he were calamity of calamities, or a piece of mountain cased in steel. He was a mighty, huge Amalekite, and he drave at Gharib without speech or salute, like the fierce tyrant that he was. And he was armed with a mace of China steel, so heavy, so potent, that had it smitten a hill, he'd have smashed it. And when he charged, Gharib met him like a hungry lion, and the brigand aimed a blow at his head and with his mace, but he evaded it, and it smote the earth, and sank therein half a cubit deep. Then Gharib took his battle flail, and smiting Jamkhan on the wrist, crushed his fingers, and the mace dropped from his grasp. Whereupon Gharib bent down from his seat in cell, and snatching it up, swifter than the blinding levin, smote him there in full on the flat of the ribs, and he fell to the earth, a long-stemmed palm tree. So Sahim took him, and pinioning him, haled him off with a rope, and Gharib's horsemen fell on those of Jamkhan, and slew 50 of them. The rest fled. Nor did they cease flying till they reached their tribal camp, and raised their voices in clamor, whereupon all who were in the castle came out to meet them, and asked the news. They told the tribe what had passed, and when they heard that their chief was a prisoner, they set out for the valley, vying with one another in their haste to deliver him. Now, when King Gharib had captured Jamkhan, and had seen his braves take flight, he dismounted and called for Jamkhan, who humbled himself before him, saying, "I am under thy protection, O champion of the age." Replied Gharib, "O dog of the Arabs, dost thou cut the road for the servants of Almighty Allah, and fearest thou not the Lord of the worlds?" "O my master," asked Jamkhan, "and who is the Lord of the worlds?" "O dog," answered Gharib, "and what calamity dost thou worship?" He said, "O my lord, I worship a god made of dates, kneaded with butter and honey, and at times I eat him and make me another." When Gharib heard this, he laughed till he fell backwards and said, "O miserable, there is none worship worth save Almighty Allah, who created thee and created all things, and provideth all creatures and daily bread, from whom nothing is hid, and he over all things is omnipotent." Quoth Jamkhan, "And where is this great God, that I may worship him?" Quoth Gharib, "O fellow, know that this God's name is Allah, the God, and it is he who fashioned the heavens and the earth, and guard the trees to grow and waters to flow. He created wild beasts and birds and paradise and hellfire, and veileth himself from all eyes seeing, and of none being seen. He and he only is the dweller on high, extolled by his perfection. There is no God but he." When Jamkhan heard these words, the ears of his heart were opened. His skin shuddered with horripilation, and he said, "O my lord, what shall I say that I may become of you, that this mighty Lord may accept of me?" Replied Gharib, "Say, there is no God but the God, and Abraham the friend is the apostle of God." So he pronounced the profession of the faith, and was written of the people of felicity. Then quoth Gharib, "Say me, hast thou tasted the sweetness of all Islam?" And quoth the other, "Yes." Whereupon Gharib cried, "Loose his bonds." So they unbound him, and he kissed ground before Gharib and his feet. Now, whilst this was going on, behold, they espied a great cloud of dust that towered till it walled the wold. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 643rd night, she pursued, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Jamkhan Islamed and kissed the ground between the hands of Gharib, and as they were thus, behold, a great cloud of dust towered till it walled the wold, and Gharib said to Sahim, 'Go and see for us what it be.' So he went forth like a bird in a full flight, and presently returned, saying, 'O king of the age, this dust is the Banu Amir, the comrades of Jamkhan.' Whereupon quoth Gharib to the new Moslem, 'Ride out to thy people, and offer to them all Islam, and they profess they shall be saved, but an they refuse, we will put them to the sword.' So Jamkhan mounted, and driving his steed towards his tribesmen, cried out to them, and they knew him, and dismounting come to him on foot, and said, 'Rejoice in thy safety, O Lord.' Said he, 'O folk, whoso obeyeth me shall be saved, but whoso gainsayeth me, I will cut him in twain with the scimitar.' And they made answer, saying, 'Command us what thou wilt, for we will not oppose thy commandment.' Quoth he, 'Then say with me, there is no God but the God, and Abraham is the friend of God.' They asked, O our lord, whence hast thou heard us these words? And he told them all that had befallen him with Gharib, adding, O folk, know ye not that I am your chief in battle plain, and where men of cut and thrust are fain, and yet a man single-handed me to prisoner, hath ta'en and made me the cup of shame and disgrace to drain. When they heard the speech, they spoke the word of unity, and Jamrkan led them to Gharib, at whose hands they renewed the profession of al-Islam, and wished him glory and victory, after they had kissed the earth before him. Gharib rejoiced in them, and said to them, O folk, return to your people, and expound al-Islam to them. But all replied, O our lord, we will never leave thee whilst we live, but we will go and fetch our families, and return to thee. And Gharib said, Go, and join me in the city of Cufa. So Jamrkan and his comrades returned to their tribal camp, and offered al-Islam to their women and children, who all to a soul embraced the true faith. After which they dismantled their abodes, and struck their tents, and set out for Cufa, driving before them their steeds, camels, and sheep. During this time Gharib returned to Cufa, where the horsemen met him in state. He entered his palace and sat down on his sire's throne with his champions ranged on either hand. Then the spies came forward and informed him that his brother Ajib had made his escape and had taken refuge with Jalan bin Karkar, lord of the city of Oman and the land of al-Yaman. Whereupon Gharib cried aloud to his host, O men, make you ready to march in 3 days. Then he expounded al-Islam to the 30,000 men he had captured in the first affair, and exhorted them to profess and take service with him. 20,000 embraced the faith, but the rest refused, and he slew them. Then came forward Jamrkan and his tribe, and kissed the ground before Gharib, who bestowed on him a splendid robe of honor, and made him captain of his vanguard, saying, Our Jamrkan, mount with the chiefs of thy kith and kin, and 20,000 horse, and fare on before us to the land of Jalan bin Karkar. Hearkening and obedience answered Jamrkan, and leaving the women and children of the tribe in Cufa, he set forward. Then Gharib passed in review the harem of Madras, and his eye lit upon Madia, who was among the women, whereupon he fell down fainting. They sprinkled rose water on his face till he came to himself, when he embraced Madia and carried her into the sitting chamber where he sat with her. And they twain lay together that night without fornication. Next morning he went out, and sitting down on the throne of his kingship, robed his uncle al-Damai with a robe of honor, and appointed him his viceroy over all Iraq, commending Madia to his care till he should return from his expedition against Ajib. And when the order was accepted, he set out for the land of al-Yaman and the city of Oman with 20,000 horse and 10,000 foot. Now, when Ajib and his defeated army drew in sight of Oman, King Jaland saw the dust of their approach, and set to find out its meaning scouts, who returned and said, Verily, this is the dust of one hight Ajib, lord of al-Iraq. And Jaland wondered at his coming to his country, and when assured of the tidings, he said to his officers, Fare ye forth and meet him. So they went out, and they met him, and pitched tents for him at the city gate. And Ajib entered into Jaland, weeping-eyed and heavy-hearted. Now Jaland's wife was the daughter of Ajib's paternal uncle, and he had children by her. So when he saw his kinsman in this plight, he asked for the truth of what ailed him, and Ajib told him that he had befallen him, first and last, from his brother, and said, O King Gharib, biddeth the folk worship the Lord of the heavens, and forbiddeth them from the services of simulacres and others of the gods. When Jaland heard these words, he raged, and he revolted, and he said, By the virtue of the sun, Lord of the life and light, I will not leave one of thy brother's folk in existence. But where didst thou quit them, and how many men are they? Answered Ajib, I left them in Cufa, and they be 50,000 horse. Whereupon Jaland called his vizier Ja'amard, saying, Take thee 70,000 horse, and fare to Cufa, and bring me to the Moslems alive, that I may torture them, and all manner of tortures. So Ja'amard departed with his host, and fared through the first day, and the second, and till he got to the seventh day, when he came to the wadi abounding in trees, and rills, and fruits, and here he halted. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 644th night, she pursued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Jalan sent Jawamard with his army to Cufa, they came upon a wadi abounding in trees and rills, where a halt was called, and they rested to the middle of the night, when the wazir gave the signal for departure, and mounting, rode on before them till hard upon dawn, at which time he descended into a well-wooded valley, whose flowers were fragrant, and whose birds warbled on boughs as they swayed gracefully to and fro. And Satan blew into his sides, and puffed him up with pride, and improvised these couplets, and cried, I plunge with my braves in the seething sea, seized the foe in my strength and my valiancy, and the doughtiest knights want me well to be, friend to friend, and fierce foe to mine enemy. I will load Gharib and his captives' chains right soon, and return in all joy and glee, for I've donned my mail and my weapons wield, and on all sides charge at the chivalry. Hardly had Ja'amard made an end of his verse, when there came out upon him among the trees a horseman of terrible mien, covered and clad in steely sheen, who cried out to him, saying, Stand, O riffraff of the Arabs, doff thy dress, and ground thine arms gear, and dismount thy destrier, and be off with thy life. When Ja'amard heard this, the light of his eyes became darkest night, and he drew his saber and drove at Jarmkhan, for he was saying, O thief of the Arabs, wilt thou cut the road for me? And am I captain of the host of Jalan bin Kakar? And I'm come to bring Gharib and his men in bond. When Jarmkhan heard this, he said, How cooling is this to my heart and liver? And he made at Ja'amard, versifying in these couplets, I am the noted knight in the field of fight, whose saber and spear every foe affright. Jarmkhan am I, to my foes a fear, with a lance lunge known unto every knight. Gharib is my lord, nay, my pontiff, my prince, where the two hosts dash very line of might, in the inman of the faith, pious, striking awe on the plain, where his foes like the fawn take flight, whose voice bids folk to the faith of the friend, false doubling idols and gods despite. Now Jarmkhan fared on with his tribesmen 10 days' journey from Cufa city, and called a halt on the 11th day till midnight, when he ordered a march, and rode on, advancing them till he descended into the valley aforesaid, and heard Ja'amard reciting his verses. So he drove at him as the driving of a ravening lion, and smiting him with his sword, clove him in twain, and waited till his captains came up, when he told them what passed. And he said to them, Take each of you 5,000 men, and disperse round about the wadi, whilst I and the Banu Amir fall upon the enemy's van, shouting, Aloha Akbar, God is most great. When you hear my slogan, do ye charge them, crying like me upon the Lord, and smite them with the sword. We hear, and we obey, answered they, and turning back to their braves, did his bidding, and spreading themselves about the sides of the valley, in the twilight, forerunning the dawn. Presently, lo and behold, up came the army of Al Yaman, like a flock of sheep, filling plain and steep, and Jarmkhan and the Banu Amir fell upon them, shouting, Aloha Akbar, till all heard it, Moslems and miscreants. Whereupon the true believers, ambushed in the valley, answered from every side, and the hills and the mountains responsive cried. All things replied green, and dried said, God is most great, aidance and victory to us from on high. Shame to the miscreants who his name deny. And the Kafirs were confounded, and smote one another with sabres, keen whilst the true believers and pious fell upon them like flames of fiery sheen, and naught was seen but heads flying, and blood jetting, and faint hearts high. By the time they could see another's face, 2/3 of the infidels had perished, and Allah hastened their souls to the fire, an abiding place dire. The rest fled, and to the desert sped, whilst the Moslems pursued them to slay them and take captives till midday, when they returned in triumph with 7,000 prisoners. And but 26,000 of the infidels escaped, and most of them wounded. Then the Moslems collected the horses and arms, the loads, the tents, and the enemies, and dispatched them to Cufa with an escort of 1,000 horse. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. And so do I cease my tale for today, until it be morrow.